Hi, I'm Bryan Sapot, the host of the Zen and the Art of Manufacturing podcast. And today I have with me Dr. Paul Snowdon, my first PhD ever on the podcast, which is very cool. Um, so Paul, if you don't mind giving, kind of a high level of your background, that'd be great. And then we can
Absolutely.
jump into it.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. First of all, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed actually listening to your podcast, and I've become a fan of it, and I hope my time and our conversation today will be helpful for your audience. Yeah, I am a professor. That is true, but I'm not the usual professor. I came into the academia as the short story is I'm a strategy prof at a university here in Canada, McMaster University. Um, I also, because I'm a chemical engineer, that's the start of my journey, which I'll eventually kind of tie it all together. I also run the engineering and management program at McMaster, where we build the technical leaders that thrive at the center of business, innovation, and engineering, right at that intersection. And that will become probably very apparent why I have that role as we talk more throughout this podcast. But um, yeah, I joined academia after finishing my doctorate, but I spent the first 25 years of my career actually working in industry. And I started as a chemical engineer uh, back in uh, back in the GE days with Jack Welch, when Six Sigma was king and ruled the seas and was the hottest topic. So I was a black belt back in the day, a process engineer with General Electric in the plastics businesses, and through that became really quite proficient at solving problems, manufacturing problems, process problems, of course. But GE was a great company that allowed people who were good at solving problems to kind of move around. And so I actually moved out of manufacturing after about 7 years or so, and then ended up in financial services with GE, solving problems, process problems. That was actually the beginning of my business transformation journey. And we were actually digitizing insurance workflows back in like 2001 to kind of start to date myself for the audience here. But that was an amazing experience, almost destroyed $1 billion company because we totally did not understand the digitization and the processes and the human work that was going on. But fortunately for GE and my career, we figured it out and turned it into a home run. Um, but that was the beginning of a journey for me, and that led me all the way through um, the IT industry, doing process improvement, actually running business transformation, building virtual supply chains, to starting my own consulting company and being a consultant also with one of the top big four accounting firms, PwC, um, and doing a whole bunch of global consulting around leading change. And probably like many of your listeners, um, my career started as a technical a technical one. And then as I moved through the career, what really happened is I had to make a decision of, was I a technical person or something, or a business person? And what I realized was that the thing that got me most excited wasn't the technical problems anymore. Um, it was actually the people problems and how to structure thinking and teams and their collective intelligence around solving problems. And really, while I didn't realize it at the time, that was going to be the foundation of what turned out to be my doctorate, which led me to doing research around how do teams solve problems when the path forward's uncertain, and what do individuals and how do managers coach into that space. And ultimately, in 2020, I had to make a decision of whether I continued consulting and helping organizations transform, or take what I've learned and go back into the university system and train the next generation of leaders. So, um, my the thing that makes me tick and makes me work is about creating impact and scaling impact. And while I love the consulting and I still do consulting, but the challenge, of course, is it's always very narrow. You're working one client or a couple clients at a time, whereas now I can influence hundreds, if not thousands, of leaders who can transform businesses. So that's how I got into academia. But it's through 25 years of the School of Hard Knocks through General Electric and a bunch of other great companies. So um, yeah, that's how I got here.
Yeah, and it sounds like, I mean, there's just a theme that runs through your entire career of process improvement and problem solving, right? And then when we first started talking, one of the things I found interesting is that you can problem solve on problems that you don't really know anything about, right? Like you don't have to be a technical expert in whatever problem you're trying to go after to be able to solve it. And I never really thought about it that way, but with the right
Yeah,
frameworks, it works, right?
yeah, no, exactly. It's the for me anyway, the key that I've found into having a healthy and productive and profitable business career is that you quickly realize that if you're the content expert and then the content changes, you're no longer an expert. And so what I realized, kind of fell upon it, but then it's become more clear as I've reflected on it. Lean Six Sigma or Six Sigma was a process methodology: define, measure, analyze, improve, control. So you move through phases and steps to start to systematically attack root cause and variation. And same thing with lean. Each of these domains have their own frameworks and methodologies to help um, simplify, standardize, and create better outcomes for the practitioners. So once I realized that if you become a methodology or framework expert that's independent of the problem, and that if you have a breadth of problems that you've applied that on, what you really start to develop is an expertise around solving bigger, tougher, more complex problems. And that certainly has been the case in my career. And certainly I recommend it to all my students and to everybody that I come up with is like, yeah, you start with content, but find a capability, a framework, a methodology that's independent of content, and then get creative with that. And that's certainly been my process and my journey. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good segue into what we wanted to talk about today, which was how do you create transformational shifts, right, in teams, which is almost that it's the larger problems, right? I'm not solving a process problem on a manufacturing line. Now I'm solving a larger problem of how do we faced with various things today, right? So like tariffs, AI, like all the different things going on in the world, or if I want to create digital transformation in a department or a company,
Yeah.
how do I do that, right? Which is a different kind of problem.
No, 100%, 100%. And it's probably the most important thing that a leader and a senior leadership team have to grapple with is what problems are we solving for as an organization? And because that defines the space that the org and the teams within the organization, that defines the playing field that they're going to operate in. And it's interesting when one of the things I think about a lot, one of the things that I work with teams, organizations, senior leaders, boards around is what is the problem that we're really working on? And why are we working on these problems? And because the real question is around how we create sustainable value. And to do that versus short term versus long term, you have to be working on a set of problems that have longevity, that are going to create differentiation as a firm, that have a rationale and a connection to something larger than money. And one of the biggest things that teams have to work through is who do we serve and why. And that is the starting point of any transformation. That's the starting point of any meaningful shift that you want to create, is to reframe the problem from something that we're doing to survive, to something that we're doing in service of our customers, the markets, the patients, your clients. What is it that they are lacking that we are uniquely positioned to offer? And that's the real strategic question that leaders have to work through, is what is that unmet need that we are uniquely positioned to offer, that really kind of connects three things: the values of the organization. What do we stand for? What is our history and our legacy and our DNA? What is at the heart of that? Because that can't change. That's always there. It's just the problem spaces we work on are expressions or opportunities to demonstrate those values, to live the values. So the values are always one of the anchors, the capabilities that you have in the organization. So we connect values with capabilities, with the unmet needs of your customers, your clients, your patients, your stakeholder groups. And once you do that, that allows a new question to be asked: is which of those opportunities that we've just identified that connect and live in that sort of center point of the Venn diagram, which of those are then profitable? Which of those best align? Which of those have a growth trajectory that is in line with our desires and appetites, et cetera, et cetera. So we first go through a problem clarification before we move through a filtering and identification. But that's it's the heart. The first thing the leadership team has to do is set the target, set the goal, aim as an archer would, and define where the arrow has to go before they figure out how much pressure, how's the arrow going to go, how's it going to fly, etc.
So where the arrow's going, the goal is really the problems we're solving, right? The thing we're going to solve that's going to create the sustainable value. That's what you mean.
Yeah, but it needs to be also kind of an emotional thing, a something that sort of has an emotional core to it, um, and and it needs to be focused on an external um, outcome or an external group. I'll give you a couple of examples just to make it come to life a little bit. During COVID, I was interviewing and doing some research on I looked at three organizations, two that were successful and moving through and thriving through COVID, and one that was not. The two that were successful had a very common characteristic, which will bring this idea that I'm sharing to life. One was a massive telecommunications company here in Canada, 60,000 employees, multi complex business unit environment. Like they're not just in telco, they're in everything. Um, the other was a liberal arts college, which is a very different business. But if anybody knows liberal arts colleges, certainly in the US and here in Canada, they're under immense pressure. Many are closing. Demand is down. And then the third organization was a light manufacturing company that was trying to adapt and evolve given the pandemic constraints. So the two companies, the telco and the university, they did very much exactly what I just described. The telco, their mission and their focus was keep our customers connected, keep our employees safe. That was the mission. It didn't describe the problem exactly, other than keep our customers connected and keep our employees safe. And it didn't describe how it was going to be done. It didn't describe what needed to be done. But this was the emotional core that everybody could connect with, and it was an externally focused goal, mission. The liberal arts college had a very similar thing. Theirs was building leaders with heart. They redefined or reframed the mission of the college uh, to build leaders with heart. And the manufacturing company was keep the lights on, very inward focused. And so, unsurprisingly, as you would imagine with the story that in the context of what we're talking about, the telecommunications company managed with that mission, keep our customers connected and keep our employees safe, managed to do things in days and weeks that previously took years because they operationalized around what do we need to do today to keep our customers connected? What do we need to do today to keep our employees safe? And they broke down the barriers, the internal inhibitors that got in the way, KPI conflicts, incentive misalignment, teams and metrics that are not aligned. They focused all around those two core missions. And each day they asked a very simple question with each team within the organization. Because I was interviewing the senior vice president of digital transformation right at the top, and he was describing to me how they did this. And each day they had their daily stand-ups, very agile, lean kind of approach. Your daily huddle, get ready at the start of the shift, right at the start of the day. And they huddled up 10, 15 minutes and they went around in a circle and they asked the simple question. The leader of that team asked the question to the team, what do we need to do today? And the key phrase being today to keep our people safe. What do we need today to keep our customers connected? And they went around, and each person on the team had to say what they thought. They unlocked the potential of the organization because they had a very clear mission that was externally focused, that was highly emotive, that was something that could rally, but they operationalized it through the act of the huddles, the stand-ups, and the manager leading the conversation with what do we need to do today? Not next week, not next month, not next quarter, today. And of course, what that does is empowers action. And any of the roadblocks that were coming up, the manager had to report upwards in the organization. So they also had mechanisms to deal with conflict, and they put structures and processes in. Of course, they're measuring process outcomes, they're measuring financial outcomes. Uh, and unsurprisingly, they thrived through this, the telco. They actually had the highest employee engagement they've ever had during COVID in a highly institutional structured organization like a telco, like a 60,000 person organization, which is akin to government or big banks and, like very static and stoic organizations
It's
that
designed
thrive
to
on.
be that way, right?
It
Like it's,
is,
yeah.
yeah. And yet here they have the highest employee engagement they've ever had. They're actually financially hitting their numbers during a time when they're under complete both political scrutiny, economic scrutiny, financial scrutiny, brand reputational scrutiny. Same thing on the liberal arts college. So they focused on building leaders with heart, and they operationalized through a completely different. It's not manufacturing, it's not telco, it's the same process. They've focused on this externally oriented mission. They then operationalize around how do we do this? How do we actually build leaders with heart in our students? What would we do with curriculum? What would we do with extracurricular? How would we do or engage with industry partners and other kinds of things to design, to create these shifts in the students? Well, this liberal arts college, which in Canada, we had actually ones that were closing, which is incredibly rare in Canada for for any university or college to close, like incredibly rare. And there was right across the board, there was different areas where they were shutting down like arts programs and different things. They're regularly growing enrollment 20% year over year. They've gone and built new residences for the capacity because they've gone to the market, in essence, with a compelling value proposition that we build leaders with heart based on a classic traditional liberal arts education, and that's our differentiation, that we connect the dots between classical liberal arts thinking and how does the leader emerge from that? Externally focused, reorient the organization around how to enable that, and then systematically, month, quarter, semester, work on making it better. Um, Unsurprisingly, in both those organizations, employees retained, engagement within the staff increasing, outcomes for the customer and for the stakeholder elevated. Now we go to the manufacturing firm.
One question before you go to the
Yeah, sure.
manufacturing firm. So at the telco, it sounds like, they were messaging this and sort of driving the change down through the daily huddles. Cause like every day, what are we doing to reinforce this mission that we've come up with? So everyone's exposed to it. Everyone gets feedback from it. How did the liberal arts college do the same thing?
Well, similar processes, slower cadence. The Because there's two things that are happening when an organization undertakes these kinds of initiatives. The first thing that you're thinking about is from a change adoption perspective, where are we on the crisis curve? So for the telco, we were in a high state of crisis, and we had very little time because it was at the start of COVID. So there was very little time to react. And as a result, the rate of change and the rate of disruption within their business had to be accelerated. And everybody was on board with it. There was no need to, quote unquote, manufacture a crisis. They were in a bona fide crisis. The world was in a bona fide crisis. But for the university, they were in a different aspect of that crisis curve. They were looking ahead and sort of in a more of anticipatory and reaction, right on the edge of anticipating and reacting to what's going on in the market, because they started the journey probably 5 years before. And if anybody's been around a university, it's very much like the government. It is slow and steady wins the race, and finding ways to work within the structure. And that's very much what happened at that university, and I was actually a part of it. I came in as a professor along the way, so I witnessed and interviewed the president of the university. Um, so I got to see firsthand what was going on. Um, but they operationalized this because they did the sense of urgency around what had to happen. Um, they didn't have to short circuit the normal operating processes within the university. So they worked within it. However, going back to sort of Deming's principles and things like this, if we kind of go back to the manufacturing and the Zen piece, constancy of purpose. If we go back to first principles of quality, you know, the first principle is constancy of purpose, Deming's words. And that's what both of these, by having that mission oriented focus, that's what you're providing the organization is constancy of purpose. And what you're doing as a leadership team in the context of the universities, the story that I'm telling about the university, they worked within the operating mechanism of the university. But what drove it was the constancy of purpose. There was no letting go that we are building leaders with heart, and that after every semester, when we look at the course evaluations and what's happening in student outcomes, learning outcomes, and that kind of thing, and we're looking at the programs and we're looking at the courses and we're constantly evaluating how to make it better. That constancy of purpose and that bridge of how do we build leaders with heart drove the connections across courses, across programs. It drove the improvements within the courses and the programs. It framed the recruiting that we were doing to generate revenue. It positioned in terms of additional revenue streams how we would go to alumni and other investors to actually make donations to the university to build the endowments that are so important from a university, because that's really what drives or keeps a university thriving, is to decouple, the operating budget that comes from government versus the endowment that sort of allows you to be more bold with what you're doing. All of that happens when you have a really emotional, motivating. It allows purpose and mission. It allows you to position and sell and differentiate yourself. And the benefits have happened in both those organizations. They
Yeah, so it's like in the liberal arts college, like same meeting cadences, same process, except every time basically we're making decisions or going to do things, does this get us towards, creating leaders with heart, right? Does this align with the purpose, right?
Exactly. And the other thing that's really important when these are all ways that you start to operationalize transformation, by the way. We're kind of connecting a few dots, even though I haven't explicitly stated these things. But one of the things that has to happen is that you have to, and it's a tension that senior leaders always manage is, how do you hold power while simultaneously giving power to your teams? And this is right. Like people, they want to know, I'm going to hit the numbers, but to hit the numbers, you got to let go. But then the question is, how do you let go? How do you engage and that sort of classic bottoms up kind of activity sets? And the way you do that is that you have to create guiding principles, in essence, rules of thumb that allow the frontline worker or the middle manager to make decisions independently of the senior boss, so that they know. So coming back to the point you made was that as in all these organizations, it's a very simple kind of guideline that you end up giving. When you have the mission that's very clear, right? How do we build leaders with heart? If you're trying to empower frontline decision making, then the question that every decision filters through is, does this help us build leaders with heart? And it goes into one of three buckets. Yes. Okay. No. Maybe. The yes bucket, anything that falls into the yes bucket then becomes prioritization fodder, right? Like, okay, let's talk about all the yeses. The no bucket is like, well, let's not work on that right now. That is the stuff that we kill. We stop. It's like, yeah, it's an interesting idea, but it doesn't help us build leaders with heart. And the maybe bucket is where you say, now, and this is where the leaders can start to coach their teams as well, which is another part of the behavioral change and the culture change that you start to develop, is now you can have a more strategic conversation with your team to say, that's a pretty good idea, but what would we have to do to make it a yes? Yes, it helps us build leaders with heart, or yes, it helps keep our customers connected, or yes, it helps us keep what do we have to change to make it a yes? And that simple guidance that you can easily coach, train, transmit to your teams, it follows because you have a very compelling mission that you're now agreed and you're working on. And this is how you start to operationalize and build capability and resilience and agility and adaptability, is because everything now you're asking the team to do is give me your best thinking on how to build leaders with heart. What do you, Prof, TA, team, staff team, what do we have to do to build leaders with heart in your course? In the telco, what do we have to do to build and keep our customers connected? What's the best things we can do? And not surprisingly, this is exactly the opposite of what the manufacturing company did. They didn't do any of this. All their whole starting point was, holy smokes, volumes have dropped. And therefore, in the classic, I put all these air quotes around here because I'm a business prof and I'm supposed to be the champion of all these things. But they go, well, we've got to right size the organization to the volumes at hand. Classic corporate speak, right? Um, but what that means is that we're going to shed jobs. We're going to lay people off. We're going to fire people. So that's from a firm perspective, they're looking at what do we need to do to survive? And I totally get it. But these other organizations were also under very similar financial constraints, but they took a different approach. But the manufacturing company, their first reaction was cut jobs. And they cut jobs to manage costs, obviously, and to recalibrate the costs and the revenues so that there's a profit margin that's sitting in there. Classic capitalism, and no problem with that. But the problem that creates is what happens next. So you get through the crisis, and now, of course, you want to rebuild the business. You want to tap into new volumes. In the case of this company, they were able to go and secure some government contracts for different PPE, and were able to retool their manufacturing to start to create and manufacture these products, which is amazing. Like, the people that were left were working very, very hard. But to grow into that new capacity, they wanted to go back and tried to go back to the very people that they let go. Some came, some didn't. And of course, the cycle continued as those orders dropped off. They shed workforce, and then da da da. And as perhaps is unsurprising, is that each time they did that, the people who came back were the people who were the least skilled and the least employable, people who had no other options. They weren't getting the good people coming back because of how they'd been managed and how they'd been treated through this whole thing. And also, unsurprisingly, there was major turnover in the senior leadership team, and the company struggled. Now, they did survive. I'm not going to say that strategy didn't work, but the real thing is, which of these three companies are more positioned for growth and are growing, and which one is struggling to get back to where they were. And it's the manufacturing company. And it's not the business they're in, it's that the human capital that they needed to unlock and find and exploit new opportunities. They didn't have the top talent with them anymore. They didn't have fully engaged workforces. They had people who were doing the least to stay employed as opposed to doing the most to create an outcome shift. And that's the big difference when we start talking about successful transformations, is that the key to the engine of the transformation is the people driving the transformation. And it starts with the idea of the transformation, but it's ultimately the people in the organization that have to execute the transformation. And that always comes down to teams and how the teams are working, how the teams are operating, how the leaders of the team are actually executing. Now, the conditions to make that happen, you need that really compelling mission, and then you need systems and processes to start to connect the daily activity with that mission and enable the activity. And this is where top down and bottoms up connect. And this is the real heart of the transformation, is that the leadership team defines that target, defines the mission objective, defines the outcome, but not how to get there. And then you work with the people in the teams to say, what do we need to do to actually get there? And that, of course, is a process. It's a series of steps and actions that people take. The best way to do it, if I could give your audience a glimpse into how to operationalize this, there's really 4 steps to creative problem solving. The first step is to clarify the problem itself. The second step is, once the problem is identified, to then develop ideas on how to solve that problem. The third step is, of the best ideas, how do we further develop them into practical solutions? And then the fourth step is, of those practical solutions that we've prototyped, tested, experimented, POC'd, then how do we implement? And what organizations miss is that you have to move through those four stages. Now, there can be, some feedback and some iteration, of course, as you learn more as you go through. But those four stages, those are like the meta creative problem solving steps. Clarify the problem, ideate, develop solutions, and then implement. And so that's one important thing. The other idea I would give the audience as you move through those four stages is that there's actually two forms of thinking that we need to tap into as we move through any problem. One is divergent thinking steps, and the other is convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is where we generate ideas, we generate possibilities, we generate solutions or generate stuff. The second step is then the convergent action, which is prioritization. So you first diverge, then converge with your teams. So to go back to like the Rogers example to bring this to life, right? So the clarify step at a team level, forget about corporate, at a team level, was the team leader going around and say, what are the most important things we can do today to keep our people safe or keep our customers connected? That's a brainstorming exercise. That's a divergent thinking exercise to generate ideas. Idea one from person, idea two, idea three. They go around the horn with the team. You get those ideas on the table. The second step is convergent thinking, which is the prioritization step, where with the same group, you're like, guys, this is awesome thinking, fantastic. But what's the most important thing with the most impact that we could work on today? That's the converge question. And now you go back around the horn with your team for them to say, well, the most important thing with the most impact that we can do today, of all the ideas we came up with, I think it's this, Paul. And then next person says, I think it's this. And the third person says, I think it's that. But you're going through to define and clarify what are we working on today. And that diverge converge is the heart of this creative problem solving engine. This is how leaders have to work through and create the buy-in. As you move through each of those steps, clarify, ideate, develop solutions, implement, each of those moves through diverge converge. Like, great. So we've clarified on the most important idea. Now you move into the ideation phase. It's like, okay, so let's explore this a little bit more. What are all the things we got to do? Blah, 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 blah. And now you're, okay, great. Of all these things we just got on the table, what are the really most important ones? Now we're back in a diverge on the ideation to clarify the best ideas. Okay, great. How the heck are we what do we really got to do to do this today, guys? Well, so-and-so's got to talk to maintenance. So-and-so's got to talk to HR. So-and-so's got, okay, great. Now we're developing the solutions. So you go through this diverge converge pattern to bring it all together. And this is the secret sauce for how to create buy-in and engagement with the team. You have a creative problem solving process that's independent of the problem. This is what I do around the world with my consulting. Reveal it all. Um, but it's clarify, diverge, converge, then ideate around the problem, diverge, converge. Okay, great ideas, team. Super, love it. Let's develop this a little bit more. Let's dig in. Who else needs to be involved in the conversation? Diverge, converge. Okay, I love it. Let's try and run a little POC, a little proof of concept. Let's test this puppy. Great. Let's get some data. Let's tweak it based on what we've learned. Okay, we got a good idea now. What do we got to do to really implement this and scale it across the organization? So it's simple in a way, which makes it powerful. Of course, it's tricky, and you got to dance a little bit when you're doing it, because if you're really doing it correctly, and this is this tension between holding power, giving power. If you really do this correctly, for all the leaders out there, you have to be okay with an unknown solution emerging. You have to be okay with some disruption happening within your teams, your organization, your relationships, your customers. Because if you're really going through and creatively solving the problem, it means by definition that the answer to that question can't be what you've already done.
Yeah.
And by that, you've got to be okay. And in fact, that's one of the sort of litmus tests for this thing is, if no one's uncomfortable with the ideas coming out of the team, then you are not pushing the boundary. Because that means you're playing too safe. You're not really testing the envelope and the boundary conditions of how teams are working together, or how you're interacting with suppliers, or how you're interacting with your value chain, or how you're working internally inside your organization. If it's not uncomfortable, it's too safe, because it's much easier to tame a wild idea than it is to push a lame idea. And what we need to know when we're kind of really trying to transform teams and ways of working is, where are those pain points, those pressure points, those, woo, it's getting a little crazy. Okay, we're getting close. Now, you don't do it sort of in a way that's, creating irreparable
Reckless.
harm to people or anything like that. But by the same token, you're purposely challenging as leaders. Are we being brave enough? How are we demonstrating courage through this process? What is the rate of learning that we're moving as we transform around this mission? And this is the kind of leadership that's required to solve and create sustainable competitive advantage. Because for organizations, for leaders that are leading organizations, you 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 have to go to places that you're not currently operating in. And the world, at the top of the podcast, you mentioned, Bryan, like all of the various kind of external environmental threats that are on businesses, whether it's AI or tariffs or climate change, or, I
Yeah.
mean, God, the list is longer than anybody cares to imagine. But the flip side of that, all those threats are opportunities. And we know 100% that opportunity sits at the intersection of multiple problems. So when a business positions itself at the intersection of multiple problems and asks itself, given our values, given our capabilities, and given the unmet needs that are sitting in the intersection of these multiple problems, what can we do? How can we help? This is where you find the mission. This is where you find sustainable value, because when you put yourself at the intersection of multiple unmet needs, and we know it's going to sit across digital, we know it's going to sit across the physical spaces we're operating in. We also know that human-centered design is going to be at the heart of this. So how does an organization imagine or reimagine new services, new products, new offerings that are connecting and working together to capitalize on this opportunity that's emerging? Because it's both. I'm so excited for all of my students, and equally worried for them. The ones that I'm super excited for are the ones who look at the world that we're operating in and say, holy smokes, this is the opportunity of a lifetime.
Yeah.
And the ones that I'm worried about are the ones that go, well, I just want a regular job. It's like, dude, that ain't happening. The regular job is going to be automated. And like, to just to put a finer point on it, if you think about the value that was created through the revolution, the computing revolution, going from desktop to cloud to mobile. And you think about the companies that shifted in that space and the value that was created by companies that moved into that space. And it don't even have to be an IT company, like regular companies that recognize that there's business models and revenue streams, that if we are moving in and the world is moving in, the mega trend is going in this direction, that we need to be part of the mega trend. If those companies that chose to operate in those spaces created massive value. And if you think about the graduates that are coming out now, but also the companies that we're operating in right now, and you think about the AI revolution, and you think about how that's connecting to the physical spheres, the digital spheres, the biological spheres that we operate in and live in today, there is massive opportunity for bold strategic vision about how do we change or rethink or reimagine our business about where the world's going. Because this is it. Like, for every organization, for all the leaders that are listening right now, you have to be thinking ahead and positioning your company. Where will the world be in 5 years? And you have to be building capabilities inside your organization now to be ready for that. Because if you're not, you will be in the crisis curve and at the hell of a crisis of the crisis curve in 3 to 5 years if you're not there. And this is what happens. The companies that really are thinking and asking those questions now, what do we have to do to create value given these mega trends that are happening? Because the mega trends never go away and they only become deeper entrenched. And the longer you ignore them, the harder it is to catch up. And the harder it is to catch up, eventually you get to the point like the manufacturing company where they're like, we got to let people go. And then the people you let go are the very people you need to overcome the trend, and they don't come back because of how they've been treated and how they've experienced it. So there's opportunity for forward-thinking leaders to think about what is the mission that we're on, what is the unmet need, what's the intersection that we can be operating in, and then what are the capability changes that we need to either develop, cultivate, buy, partner with, be strategic about how you create those capabilities in your organization. But ignoring where everything's going is the 100% thing that's going to kill your business.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I guess the mission part of it even makes more sense, right? Because you do identify with all the uncertainty around, let's just focus on technology and AI and the changes that are going to come there, like the generational change we're going to see. It is an uncertain future, like you're talking about, right? And
Correct.
if you have the mission, let's just go with the telco of, connecting people and keeping people safe. How can we leverage the mega trend to make that happen? Make it happen faster, do it better, right? And it creates a lot of clarity.
Exactly. And this is, it sounds like a very simple thing, like those phrases that I just rhymed off. Obviously, that's the outcome of some very serious thought that has happened at the senior level of the organization to really move through a process of what does it mean to be the best in the world? And then part B, what does it mean to be the best for the world? And up to this point, the only question that senior leaders really think about is that what does it mean to be best in the world? And where we're going, which is so clear, especially when you think about the engagement and how you create buy-in and the sort of the engagement chasm that sits with employees. Like Gallup just released their 2025 data, and it's like 31% of the workforce is engaged, which of course means 69% are not. And so that is a huge miss slash opportunity, is how do you increase the engagement level? And it's, I have seen it time and time again when if you have the mission that's focused around these external focuses, not just the internal, like what does it mean to be best in the world and the financial impact, but what does it mean to be best for the world? And I would encourage senior leaders to think about that question in your organization. What would it mean to be best for the world? How would that look? How would that express itself? And that will open up a whole new series of ideas, opportunities, that you can go and run at. Um, and what you then connect that to with is your values and what you stand for and what you think you have capabilities around. And then you can start to make your strategic investments and strategic decisions about what do we need to build, borrow, or buy. But just thinking about the simple financial side is a guarantee for continuing the status quo. And that will lead to continued burnout, continued challenges and stress levels, and all the other stuff that happens. Whereas when you have that mission focus that's externally oriented, um, it works. That's my big advice for everybody.
Yeah, in my experience, coming up with those missions, like you said, is the hardest part, right? Especially for unsexy businesses. Like there's all these companies out there, like the Tom Shoes that gives away shoes and, people plant trees. But like if you make paper clips, what's the mission, right?
Yeah.
It's a
And
tough one.
that's why that question of what does it mean for our company to be the best for the world? That is a very powerful reframe, because that in there they will the listeners of this call will find gold.
Yeah. I,
I can
I
I
have
can
never
guarantee
heard
it.
somebody frame it that way. Best in the world and best for the world. Like it does make you think about it differently. Yeah. The other thing we're kind of at the end of our time, but the thing that I love about your problem solving framework, at least from a leader perspective, and I would also say from a team member perspective, is that the ideas seem to be coming mostly from the team, right? I'm as a leader, you're not being told what to do. It's a collaborative effort to figure this out, prioritize things, decide what we're going to do, right? And so people are more bought in, they're more engaged, right?
That's the whole, it's the Jedi mind trick, pay no attention to these droids, like it, when you define the art of it is the definition of the question. When you frame, the leader frames the question, which is you set the thinking frame for the team. That's the real, how you sort of still hold power, that holding power, giving power tension I was referring to before. The way you hold or maintain the control to a certain extent is you frame the question, and then you give the power, which creates the buy-in, which creates the engagement. You give the power by then inviting the team to give their best thinking about that question. But and that's the art of it. And and the and you also get into these challenges, as you can imagine, of lots of great ideas. And then you just go back to the team, you say, well, which one should we try first? And you go around forcing them to choose, because the whole thing when you're building this, as you've been hinting at is that it is way easier to guide a horse that's moving than to get a horse that's at stationary to move in the first place. I can steer a horse that's moving. I can't get a horse to move if the horse doesn't want to move. So what we're doing with this, even if you're like, I'm not sure if that's the best idea, park it. Get the horses moving. Let them course correct. You can steer the horses if they're moving, but if they're not moving, you ain't going anywhere. And that's the real part of it, is so you can then manage the rate of change, the rate of decision making, the rate of feedback looping, the rate of decision making, and then you can guide and course correct towards your target. And that is exactly how you do it, Bryan.
Fantastic. Hopefully you didn't give away all your secrets there.
Hey, it's all good.
Well, Paul, this is really interesting. Like I could keep going on these topics forever. They've always been interesting to me my whole career, but I really appreciate your time being on the podcast today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
So if anybody wants to get in touch with you or kind of learn more about what you do, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, my consulting firm, if you want to go that route, is Working Theory, and anybody can reach out Paul at workingtheory.ca. And if you're more interested in the academic stuff and the work I do there, you can contact me at McMaster University, Snowdon P at McMaster.ca.
I feel like your classes would be a lot of fun. You make this stuff really interesting.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
All right, cool. Well, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Cheers.